So guys, I want to talk about Ring of Honor, and my big question is that, do you feel that Ring of Honor needs to be canceled? Because to me, it really honestly feels like when WWE had ECW for a couple of years, that, towards the latter end of ECW, that, the titles really didn't matter and it wasn't really like a developmental thing. So, one of the reasons why Vince McMahon got rid of ECW was just because, there was really nothing that he could do with it. It was just a bunch of championships and just, things that really didn't matter. And obviously with NXT, a developmental territory, we kind of see how that investment has worked really. And I think with like Ring of Honor, it really needs, a huge revamp. It either needs to go away forever or it needs to become a developmental territory. And it also needs to feature a bunch of developmental wrestlers feuding with people around the world, almost very similar to NXT, like, an AEW version of NXT. That is the best way to make money, even though I know some people may say, what, why make it NXT copycat? It's always good to make a show with a bunch of wrestlers and show their journey and show that, hey, these guys would be successful, really. You connect with wrestlers and you see how they grow over a period of years. That's definitely good because part of professional wrestling is the journey of wrestlers and saying, with all the time that I invested in them, eventually they're going to get their moment. So I want to do two videos. In this video, I'm going to talk about arguments for Ring of Honor to close. And I'm going to do another video about Ring of Honor to open, but to stay open. And I also want to say that I think my general opinion is that Ring of Honor needs to stay open if they do a lot of revamps. So here are 10 reasons for Ring of Honor to close. The first reason is that the world title means nothing because, it's with Chris Jericho and it's kind of been hot potatoed around a little bit. And then also, you did something bad at the Manhattan Center. You had Matt Cardona come out and he's not even part of AEW. So it's almost like saying that, you have to find people from other companies to have a compelling match with your champion. And, definitely the Ring of Honor title has a large lineage and it meant something, when Bryan Danielson, CM Punk, Seth Rollins, Cody Rhodes, and other people are holding it. But with AEW, it's not really meant anything. It needs to be a title that elevates wrestlers, and that should happen. You look at somebody like Mark Briscoe, he's not really been elevated in any way. He could be a great world champion. He could be a great contender for a world champion. But honestly, if they kind of tied in his world heavyweight reign and him being wanting to become the AEW champion, that's good, but they've not done that really. So it's definitely just an irrelevant title. The next big issue is that there's no world heavyweight champion division in Ring of Honor. The only people that you know about is Mark Briscoe, who is now an AEW wrestler, not really on Ring of Honor that much. And the other person is Chris Jericho. There's really nobody else. Again, like I've talked about, do a feud with Dustin and Chris Jericho. I think they're actually going to try to do Jeff Jarrett versus Chris Jericho. And they may do, and I've even talked about in fantasy booking, do Powerhouse Hobbs. Like, it needs to be your next generation person. But it's like what I said before, Matt Cardona, he is not part of the AEW roster. Now he's actually part of the TNA roster. He may even be in TNA getting some television time in WWE. So the point of it is that it does create a lot of just, unfortunately, a lot of problems, really, because, you have to have a heavyweight champion division. Like, that's very essential, really. And all we know is Chris Jericho, really. So it's really just the Chris Jericho division. So that just doesn't make sense if you're not going to care about it, get rid of it. The next thing that I will say on my handy-dandy notes is poor pay-per-view buys. I believe that, the past couple of years, they've been getting like less than 1,500 people. I think a few years ago, they got 8,000 people or 3,000 people. But ultimately, you can't have a show with 1,500 paying fans. You have to have like at least 3,000, 4,000, 5,000, because it actually may cost more to actually have the wrestlers, have the production, and have insurance and other things than actually make a profit, really. So, if it's not really profitable, it's just a vanity project. Why keep something that is not making you money, really? So that's important. The next thing is that there's no compelling storylines. And what that means is that, to me, the best storyline that they ever did during the Ring of Honor era, the AEW era of Ring of Honor, was MJF and Adam Cole with the Ring of Honor tag team titles. It tied into the main roster. It was a good feud. But they've done nothing else that's been compelling, or nothing that's like, okay, we're gonna feature some of this on Collision, or maybe a little bit on Dynamite, or even at AEW pay-per-view. We're gonna like try to make our feuds a big deal. We're gonna do like some, highlights and whatever type of things, really. So that's been a huge issue, is that, that there's really no like compelling feuds or anything. I know like they mentioned that, I forgot what it's called, but like Athena was is like in charge of, is like, she has a lot of power in Ring of Honor, and she has a feud of like, I think she's a bunch of women around, a bunch of girlfriends around her. But that's really kind of like, that's not really like, gone over to the main roster. There's really nothing in Ring of Honor that's ever talked about or compelling. So, if you're not going to have stories that compel people, why do that? The next big issue is, there's very very poor marketing, and that just means that whenever there's a Ring of Honor like show, like Supercard of Honor, Death Before Dishonor, weekly television shows, I never ever see. I think maybe like more than 90% of the shows of AEW, they do not promote Ring of Honor, and I do understand because they're on a huge time crunch, and now they just lost Rampage, so there's really no like, okay, on Dynamite, they should always say like, hey, maybe every like 1 or 2 weeks, they're like, hey, check out Ring of Honor. This is what you're going to see. Here are some clips of some feuds and whatever. But there's really no good marketing. And also, if you're going to have like a pay-per-view for Ring of Honor, they don't really talk about that. Like usually the way you find out about these pay-per-views is that you have to go to the AEW page and be like, hey, Ring of Honor is actually having a show. So that's not good. You have to actually just really promote these events and act like it's a big deal. If you're not going to act like a big deal, if you're not going to promote a event for people to pay for, or even say, hey, pay $8 a month to watch Ring of Honor on television, if you're not going to advertise it, commercialize it, make money off of it, what are you doing, Tony? The next point I would say is it's not treated like a developmental territory. And I've said this very big. I think people are saying that AEW feels like TNA wrestling, where it's a little bit of an old folks home, So, like your top champion is, your top 2 champions are Chris Jericho and then Dustin Rhodes with the trios and the tag team title. And they're really hinting at, because Jeff Jarrett had a predominant role in at Death Before Dishonor, that you may get Chris Jericho versus Jeff Jarrett. Jeff Jarrett may become the Ring of Honor champion. And it's almost like, what are you doing really? How does that really help your company long term? Because, Dustin and Jeff Jarrett and Chris Jericho, they probably have another like, between 1 to 5 years left. And the other thing is that I think Jeff Jarrett has 1 more year on his contract. So there is a sense of, okay, if you're going to invest in all these older people, what about your next generation? Why isn't somebody like Billy Starks, Athena, Big Cass, Powerhouse Hobbs, The Righteous with Elias, and other people that have, or Mark Briscoe, like people who are maybe 40 and younger, why aren't they actually standing out? Why aren't they actually being something? Why aren't they, doing well in Ring of Honor and then going over to the main roster? And included in that is Sammy Guevara, and also included in that is also Commander, so you have to treat it like a developmental territory. You have to sign a lot of new wrestlers, just sign a lot of younger wrestlers, have people that are compelling, and they can actually cut a promo. Another big issue is the Von Erichs. Like they're such a draw because of their name, really, but you're not really developing them. You're not putting them on television for compliments. You're not making people familiar. You're not advertising their appearances. So you're not treating it like a developmental territory. The next big issue I'll talk about is Tony Khan. He's super busy. I believe he runs the Jacksonville Jaguars, Collision, Dynamite. I'm not sure. I believe Ring of Honor he also runs. He does like promoting, selling out venues. Finding venues to sell out. He's a very busybody. I've even said too that I think that Bryan Danielson, Sting, Jeff Jarrett, Dustin Rhodes, when they retire, Adam Copeland, like a lot of retired wrestlers should kind of, instead of a retirement plan, like say, hey, can you run Ring of Honor? Can you bring in your influence? Imagine if you saw Bryan Danielson every single week in a suit and a tie, just like sexy boy Shawn Michaels, and he was actually getting Ring of Honor over, and he was a recognizable name and all that. There's a lot that you can do if you kind of said, okay, I'm going to have other people produce the show. They also mentioned there's 30 writers for AEW. So the problem is that having too many writers is bad for everybody. Because sometimes you may have a guy with a great idea, and then Tony may say, "Hey, you know what? Here are 29 other people. They all have to have a say in your idea or have something that they throw in, really." And then you have a great idea that gets enhanced 29 times or gets worse 29 times. So that's one of the reasons why you have to be extremely careful. That's one of the things that I've said is that, with Ring of Honor, you should have different people producing it. You should also have like different people writing for it. You should take you should just have 10 people per show, 10 people for Dynamite, 10 people for Collision, 10 people for Ring of Honor. And it allows Tony to have less responsibilities because, he's spread too thin, really. As the old saying goes, a jack of all trades is the master of none. So I really think that that's one of the big issues. And if Tony's going to spread himself too thin and it's going to be an afterthought, learn your lesson from Rampage. It's not worth having if you can't put in the right amount of time for it. And it's not just signing wrestlers under 1 day or 2 day contracts for your pay-per-views. It has to be a long-term investment. You have to have people in there who can and have the time to put in quality, really. But if you're not going to do that, then why have it? The next thing that I will say is most people don't know about Athena. Athena has been a champion in AEW for probably maybe around 800 days. She's been a champion for like 2 years, maybe close to 2.5 years. But I've actually talked to people outside the Manhattan Center when I was in New York City, and there's plenty of people who are like, I didn't know Athena Ember Moon is actually in AEW. So isn't that a little crazy that you have somebody that's holding a top title, a women's championship, and most people do not know do not know that she's actually wrestling for your company, and she's been champion for 2 years with that title. And then the other part of it is that there's actually a lot of people who thought she was retired, or some people who thought that she was dead, really. So it kind of shows you just the lack of marketing, the lack of, general knowledge that people are your champion. And if you have someone like Chris Jericho as your champion, most people don't know that he's the champion of Ring of Honor. It says something about your company. Like imagine if they, like CM Punk, imagine if they brought back ECW and then CM Punk won the ECW championship again. People would know about that, but imagine if people didn't know. Imagine if you had John Cena, win the NXT heavyweight championship and people didn't know about that. That would be a little stupid and ridiculous, or imagine if Shawn Michaels won the NXT championship and he did like an old man power takeover. There's definitely a thing to say about, how you advertise things, about your storytelling, about your promotion, about, who you're featuring as a champion, relying on somebody to be a champion for 2 years. And most people do not know that the person's actually been a champion for that long, really. So it's a clear indication that if you're not going to invest in promoting these wrestlers, and it's to a point where people don't even know that they're wrestling or retired, and then that's a general consensus of a lot of people, there's something wrong. If you're not going to make it a big deal or make your champions a big deal, why keep it? The next thing that I have on my list, as a 10th thing is nobody knows about the streamers and the pure titles. That's just one thing I've hated about Ring of Honor a lot. They throw streamers into the ring and nobody explains why they do that. There's no other show that do that, maybe for Young Bucks matches in Japan, but nobody understands why the fuck they put streamers in the ring. And that is extremely retarded, pardon my language, because you have to explain to your audience, is there a traditional thing? Why does Ring of Honor do that? The next thing that I do not like is the pure title. Like, honestly, I would just blow that thing up, really. But it's also Tony Khan's fault because nobody knows what the pure title is. Why do you have 3 matches? What are the rules? How did this get established? You have to establish things. You have to make people familiar with that. It's almost just like, every single year you have the Elimination Chamber. They explain and they contextualize it with WWE. They do that with the Royal Rumble. They also do that with some other stipulation matches that they have. They do that with Hell in a Cell. They do it with the Elimination Chamber, if I've not said that already. Or they do that with, they also have like an elimination. They also have like a match in NXT, really, where it's almost like, it's like 5 people, you get a pinfall, you get a point penalty box type of thing, or even like the King of the Mountain and Lethal Lockdown in TNA Wrestling. When you have championships, when you have matches, when you have traditions in your company, Everybody has to know why you're doing that. You have to explain that to your audience. You have to make that familiar. You even should like post things. You should even like, like when at live attendance, you should have people like talk about it and say, hey, this is why we throw streamers into the ring. This is what it symbolizes. We don't just randomly do it. Oh, this is the Pure title. Why does the Pure title have these rules? Who established these rules? What's the point of it? Why are certain wrestlers going after the Pure title? Contextualizing is important. If you're not going to do that, it's going to alienate your audience and be like, I'm just watching it for the sake of watching it. It's almost like a commercial break. I don't get it, but I have to sit through it, really. That is not good. The next thing that I have is, if you're not going to care, don't have it. So that's my 10th reason. So it's like what I said, if Tony's too busy, if you're just going to have it as a dark match type of thing for your AEW television, like if you go to an AEW live show, they usually have Ring of Honor from 7 p.m. to 8 p.m. And then after the show ends at 10, they'll show some more Ring of Honor from 10 p.m. usually to 11 p.m. or to midnight. But the point of it is, if you're not going to care about Ring of Honor, why have that really? You have to make it a big deal. If you're not going to promote it, why have that? It makes no fucking sense, really. It's a waste of money. And you just can't have things go on and on and on, and you're throwing money away at it. Because eventually there will be a day where Tony's like, hey, you know what? Or Shad says, hey, Tony, you can't be having Ring of Honor, and there's so many people on this roster, and there's so much money being spent on these people. If it's not going to be a good investment, really, and you're not going to care because you're spreading yourself too thin, why the fuck have it? And then the last thing, and I think the most important reason, is it keeps people on the payroll and there's no return on investment. And I know I said this a bunch, that, you have people like Serpentico, Heavy Machinery, Preston Vance, and a lot of other people who, for one, I don't think will ever become stars in their lives, really. Or you have people that are on your AEW roster, like Max Caster, Powerhouse Hobbs, Big Cass, Bandito, Brian Keith, and a lot of other ones, or even Danny Garcia or Sammy Guevara, that can benefit from being well developed and doing double duty in Ring of Honor. So it could develop them more. You could put a championship on Powerhouse Hobbs and be like, hey, this guy's doing double duty. He's in Ring of Honor defending the title, having great matches, but he's also defending it but he's also a champion. He's also involved in storylines on Dynamite because he's going to draw for Ring of Honor. He's also going to draw for Dynamite. That's going to prepare him to be a champion. And it's almost like he's kind of doing the double duty thing. So, if you're not really going to, so if you have wrestlers that could benefit from a Ring of Honor, why not do that? Why not make money off of that? Isn't that the point of professional wrestling? But it's like what I said. If you have Preston Vance, if you have the premier athletes, if you have Heavy Machinery, and you have a couple of other wrestlers that, that are on the roster, Serpentico, that are not making money really, or the Dark Order, even if they're not making money, if they're not having compelling matches, if there's no like build or story, or if they're not like gravitating people, if they're not doing anything to draw a pay-per-view by, if they're just, there to fuck off and be around really, then it's just not, there's just no point on keeping it alive. Just do a mass release. You would probably make more money than keeping it running and going really. So there's that to be said really. It's just a lot of wrestlers on that roster that don't have the right, that don't have the right promotion. They all need to be wrestlers that want to be bigger deals. They all need to be wrestlers that are hungry for the World Heavyweight title. And they all need to be wrestlers that eventually will end up over on Collision and Dynamite. And then you need to bring in new generations of wrestlers. This should be an introduction type of thing. So it's ultimately, a really bad clusterfuck. If it's not making any money, then throw the motherfucker down the drain, really. And I would say as a 12th reason is not developing your next generation. And I know I said this, like the Righteous and Elias, that is a hell of a trios team. Imagine if they had a few of the Von Erichs. Imagine if you did something where you have other teams and then that are trying to get familiar with AEW, and you put them in Ring of Honor, and then you have Elias and the Righteous and the Von Erichs and Dustin actually wrestle on AEW, for the AEW Trios titles. Like, imagine how much that would help your company. Imagine that Trios division being a great division in addition to the tag team division. So if you're not going to invest in wrestlers, if you're not going to be like, okay, check out these next generation, look at these people go, look at these people grow, and look at these people go over to the main roster, really, it doesn't surprise me why, you watch Ricky Starks, you watch Roman Reigns, you watch Bray Wyatt, you watch Seth Rollins, you watch Samoa Joe, and you watch other people in NXT that are going to become big deals and go to the main roster and be successful, or even headline WrestleManias where, there's nobody in Ring of Honor, in my opinion, as of right now, that's ever done anything major outside of two people, outside of the Righteous having a match with MJF and Adam Cole at AEW Full Gear 2023. And then the other one is Mark Briscoe, because last year, I would say this, he was the workhorse of AEW last year, and also with Mark Briscoe, he's been, I don't think he's ever main event. I mean, he's main events in one television show, the Blood and Guts match, last year, really. And fuck Delta Airlines, because you know what? My flight got canceled during that. I wanted to see that in Nashville, but fuck Delta Airlines, by the way. But really, you've not really done anything with anybody in a very significant way outside those two moments. There's been no continuity. Quite honestly, Mark Briscoe and Jon Moxley should be fighting over the world heavyweight title at one point, really. So yeah, it's very, very unfortunate that they're not doing a lot with Ring of Honor. It really needs to be revamped. But here are like 10 reasons plus 2 more about why Ring of Honor should be canceled. If you're not going to care about it, if it's just a waste of money, just stop getting no return on investment.